Shalom, shalom. Welcome to the Chai Academy, coming to you live from the Chai Center. Chai Academy is a daily discussion class course of topics Jewish interest, and we try and do this every weekday possible. So yesterday we discussed a disturbing topic, the topic of who is a Jew, which started off as a great idea that every Jew is welcome to immediately gain citizenship in Israel, which was a welcome relief, especially after the Holocaust, and even today. Jews, we can run. We know we have a place to run. I think that's the idea. But it ended up fraught with controversy and it was this war between the various factions of Jews and the Knesset and this, that, and the other, because who is a Jew, right? Who is a Jew? Someone has right? Somebody has a Jewish father, a non-Jewish mother. Are they a Jew? Patrilineal descent, right? If somebody converted Reform, are they a Jew? It was a Pandora's box, and it still is. And it's not resolved, and I don't know if it can be resolved. But at least it started as a good idea, and even practically speaking, right? A Jew needs to run, you run, right? So it still is a good idea, and it's still welcome. It's an embrace by Israel to all Jews in the diaspora. Today we're going to talk about another disturbing topic that was never a good idea. So there's the difference. It wasn't a good idea then, it's not a good idea now, and it's sheer insanity. But how can we talk about modern day Israel without talking about the Neturei Karta, the guardians of the city? So first, an introduction. And by the way, you may not know who Neturei Karta is now, but when we're done, you've definitely seen them because they stick out like a sore thumb. So, when Theodor Herzl was pounding the podium, talking about Zionism, that we need a place for Jews to call a homeland. And by the way, it didn't have to be Israel. I think Theodor Herzl would have been just as happy if they took over the island of Hong Kong. That would have been just as fine, right? So that was in 1890 or so, and most Jews opposed his idea. And so, and we can talk about the different Jews, not all Jews, but obviously Theodor Herzl had an idea, and and it took off. But the Reform movement at that time, they opposed the idea, and they said, you know what? If we're going to have Judaism, it's going to be a homeland, and we're going to talk about yearning to go back to the Jewish homeland. We're going to be accused of dual loyalties, which we are accused of. The congressman from Minnesota, Ilan Omar, accuses Jews, but it's an anti-Semitic quip from back then. So the Reform Jews were concerned, and therefore they rejected this notion of Zionism, and they said, you know what? We can be a Jew in America, we can be a Jew in India, we can be a Jew in Europe, we can be a Jew in wherever it may be, whichever continent we find ourselves on. So Reform rejected Zionism. The leftists, the socialists, the Bundists, right? It was a society of socialist Jews. They also rejected it because they felt that it was just parochial and it was too privileged, and therefore they rejected it. The Orthodox Jews, for the most part, also rejected it because they said, "Hey, we don't want Israel to be under secular Jewish authority, and let us wait for Mashiach, for the Messiah, and then it will be under Torah. The rule will be under Torah rule, and it won't be under secular rule." So it was kind of, and I'm sure Herzl got a shock because wow, what a good idea, right? But it was rejected from different factions, from many spectrums of Jewish life, right? So the communist Jews rejected it, the socialist Jews rejected it, the leftist Jews, the Bundist Jews, the Reform Jews, the Orthodox Jews. It was just like a mess. And then came the Holocaust. Once Nazism rose to power, even before the extermination camps and the killing fields, etc. So once that happened, it then the Jews began to coalesce, right? And they said, wow. So and the committed Jews for sure, they said this was bad and it's gonna be bad, and we need a Jewish homeland so we're never caught like this again. Someone asked, "Is there a class today?" And which is strange because I am on the class. So hold on a second. I'm on the class right now on my personal page. People are watching me and commenting. So so most committed Jews said yes. However, there were a group of Jews, and they while they dress Hasidic, they're actually not from Hasidism. They come from the Vilna Gaon, which is the Litvish, the non-Hasidic Orthodox sect, and they rejected it. They viewed it as heretical, that it was completely heretical for someone like Ben Gurion, who they viewed as a heretic, as an idolater, and he was like the days of old where Jews turned, worship the golden calf. They viewed him in that category, and they said there is no way that we should have an Israel run by an extreme view, run by a heretic, run by an idolater, run by somebody who's just no good. And they said we would rather have Palestine be under Palestinian rule, or British rule, or Ottoman rule, rather than we would be under Jewish rule. So this is the Neturei Karta. They started this nonsense way back then, in 1948, right? And they called Neturei Karta. Now the Neturei Karta literally means guardians of the city, and it's based on a story in the Talmud where two students of Rabbi Judah came into a city and they said, "Where are the guardians of the city?" And so two people came up and said, "We're the guardians of the city." He says, "Yeah, you're not the guardians of the city. Bring us to the scholars. They're the real guardians of the city." So the Neturei Karta, who are Orthodox, feel that they're the true guardians, and it's an Aramaic term. But and it's not a lot of people. It's a few hundred people. Now, one is more than enough, as we'll discuss, but it's a few hundred families. They're mostly based in Mea Shearim. They're in Monsey as well, and there's a few in Brooklyn. But in Mea Shearim, and you know where Mea Shearim is where you see the signs, women, girls, if you're going to enter here, so you have to dress modestly, etc. So that's where they're based. So they're ultra-Orthodox, and they live and they're based in an ultra-Orthodox neighborhood. Now, the signs of women, girls, dress modestly before you come in here are benign compared to some of the signs of the Mea Shearim group that the Neturei Karta put up in Mea Shearim. So the Neturei Karta put up such signs as Nazism and Zionism are equal, or Zionism equals Nazism, and it's just terrible. It's just terrible. They used to be affiliated with the political group called Aguda, which is the Orthodox group that has seats in the Knesset. But then now they mock Aguda. They say, "Oh, Aguda, you compromise too much. You take money from them. You sit in the Knesset. How could you sit with these secular idolaters And how could you do that? It's against Jewish law. It's against Torah law. And a couple of years ago, they actually had ads in the paper, ads in the paper and on radio to True Torah Judaism.org or something like that. I don't even want to promote their site. And where they said that anything else you see is not other than us, is not true Torah Judaism. And now Neturei Karta, they don't take money. So the question is, why do they even live in Israel? They've always lived in Israel, right? They've always lived in Israel, and they don't view themselves living in Israel. They view themselves living in Palestine. So, and they have scar Palestinian. We'll talk about what they do, right? And so they don't take money. They don't take money from Israel. They don't vote in the elections, etc. They have really nothing to do with the Israel government. Now, they can believe what they believe, but what makes them egregious and what makes them just simply unacceptable is they met with Arafat, right? They gave money to Arafat. When Arafat was sick, they had outside the hospital in Ramallah, they had a 24-hour vigil, prayer vigil. They met with Ahmadinejad. Recently, a few years ago, one of these Neturei Karta guys were arrested for spying for Iran. They flew to Iran many times to stand in solidarity with their Muslim brothers against Israel. They publicly state that Israel has stolen Palestinian land. They're there at the UN by every General Assembly. They're there at the UN whenever Netanyahu comes to speak. They're there, and you know them. They stand behind a barricade for their security. The police put it up, and they have huge signs. They stand there with Muslim men and women. They wear that Muslim flag, and they held press conferences, etc. This guy Yisrael David Weiss is the American spokesperson, and they they denounce Israel every opportunity they can. Right now, many people confuse them with Satmar, but they're not. They're not. Some of them live in Williamsburg, but they're not Satmar. They align themselves with Satmar because Satmar are also anti-Zionists. But Satmar would never, ever fly to Iran. Satmar would never give money to the Palestinians. But Satmar does not have blood on their hands. The Neturei Karta do. And there's the difference. Now, the Rabbi Yoel of Teitelbaum of Satmar in the 1970s, I think he died in the 1970s, 70 or 70s, right? So the Satmar, Rabbi Yoel's father, Moshe Teitelbaum, so he wrote his opinions of Zionism, that we need to wait till Mashiach comes. So so his son, and it was the Imre Moshe, so his son, Yoel Teitelbaum held the same belief, and as many of the Satmars do. So that's why they aligned with him, is that they had but the Satmars are never that extreme. When the 6-Day War happened in 1967, there's a famous quote of Yoel of Satmar, and that's why the Neturei Karta really aligned themselves. So by the 6-Day War, they said that, wow, the Jews were saying, look how many miracles happened in the 6-Day War. So Yoel of Satmar said, yes, there were miracles, but they weren't miracles by God, they were miracles of Satan. That Satan had the power to create miracles. So it wasn't a holy thing, but rather it was an unholy thing. So that was completely orgasmic for the Neturei Karta people. But as I said, by the way, the Neturei Karta and the Satmar condemn them, and all the Hasidic groups condemn them. They attended a Holocaust revisionist convention. So all these Holocaust revisionists, all these anti-Semites were there, and they're there looking like Jews with their black hats and their payas and their tzitzis, etc., at a Holocaust revisionist convention. How low can you go? The founder, one of the founders, his name was Amram Blau, and he passed away, I think, in 1980s, but he was there from the beginning, right? And he, toward the end of his life, he was actually ostracized by the rest of Neturei Karta because he met a French chick, a non-Jew, and he married her, and he converted her to Judaism. But people felt that he was just it was enamored with this good-looking French girl, and so he was ostracized. Now, today's leaders, one of them would be Moshe Beck, another one would be Yisrael David Weiss. They're also ostracized by the mainstream Jewry. Right? So, and I've heard this guy Yisrael David Weiss. I've even met Yisrael David Weiss, and it wasn't pleasant what I said to him, and I have a picture actually of Yisrael David Weiss, or maybe it wasn't him, maybe I'm mistaken, but they're very orthodox and they don't shake hands with women, and who knows how they treat their own women. But I have a picture of one of these shaking a Muslim woman's hand because she's Muslim, and their cause is great, so they should. So normally they won't shake hands, but they would shake hands. And to me they're a contradiction of existence, and I pay them no heed other than they're dangerous. Now, here's the problem, is that the anti-Zionists, non-Jews, point to the Neturei Karta and they said, you see, you can be an anti-Zionist without being an anti-Semite. Now, we know that you can't be, because of Natan Sharansky defined being anti-Zionist that if you pick on Israel, right, more so than you pick on Venezuela, more so than you pick on China, more so which have incredible human rights violation, but you pick on Israel, and the UN does. The UN doesn't condemn Venezuela's treatment of humans, but they will condemn hundreds of times Israel. That's anti-Semitism. But the anti-Zionists point to them and say, look, see, they're Orthodox Jews, they represent Jewry, and they're also anti-Zionist. Now, the truth is, they don't represent Jews, right? At all. There are a few hundred families that, in my opinion, are nuts, brainwashed, completely out of line, probably guilty of treason, and you can't point to them. I think it's the same as you would say, this snake charmer who handles poisonous snakes is holy and spiritual, right? The 3Ds. Or this snake oil salesman is really a doctor. And we should go to him for his elixir, right? As we know that the somebody gives, back in the day, these snake oil salesmen, and they have the cure to this, cure to that. We know it was a folly. We know it was nonsense, right? We know it was nonsense. So you cannot look at these people and say, they're Jews. They're Jews. You can't. You can't, because they're completely off the beaten path. Completely. We're talking about, there's no, you can't. To me, I don't know what they are, but they're definitely not Jewish. Ish, maybe that's the correct word for them, Jew-ish. But you wouldn't look at them as a serious Jew with a serious opinion. They have no following. They have the president of Iran, Ahmadinejad. He followed them. He probably still follows them. And but they're vomit worthy, right? So unfortunately, the anti-Zionists point to them. Now, I don't know. I think they would agree that Israel, will become a land, will become a Jewish homeland when Mashiach comes. They probably will only accept a Mashiach if he's wearing their garment and a Palestinian flag, scarf around their neck. But they right now they chant from the river to the sea. They have exactly the same chant. But they do believe that Israel will become the Jewish homeland. The anti-Zionists believe Israel should never become the homeland. So and I don't know what they believe about a peoplehood, a land. I don't know what else they believe, but it breaks down. An anti-Zionist in the Neturei Karta at some point break down, because Neturei Karta believe there will be a time when it'll be a Jewish homeland. Zionists say never. So so I never like talking about them because I feel I'm talking against my own people. But the truth is, I'm probably not. I'm probably not talking against my own people. They are simply just are who they are, and they don't have any validity whatsoever. They do not. They do not. And I probably would not shake their hand if it was outstretched to that level. I believe they're so damaging to Israel and so damaging to the Jewish people. But there you have it. They believe in their full heart, with sincerity, that they are the guardians of the city. And they have to protect Israel from its own Jewish destruction of having someone like a Netanyahu, or having someone like a Ben Gurion or a Shamir or anybody lead Israel politics. They're not to be taken seriously, or maybe taken very seriously, but their politics are not to be taken seriously. That's all for today. So they never had a good idea from 1948 until now. Their ideas are anathema to most Jews, and it's antithetical to what most Jews believe in.